Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about identity. So what is this word identity? Now, if you look up the actual definition, it's a personality or character of an individual. My experience with this is who we believe ourselves to be and who others perceive us to be. So we can have kind of two different versions of an identity, but I think they're kind of mixed into one. And sometimes this identity, or the problem with this identity, is we can begin to get lost in this because of what others believe us to be, and then the actual thing that we get back from what others believe us to be. You see, so many years I was defined by my body, my fitness, sports, even my career as a personal trainer. I had let nearly 3 decades make up who I was. But here's what I want you to know. This goes all the way back to high school, like nearly 2 decades. I programmed myself to believe that I had to be the fastest, the biggest, the strongest in everything I did. It didn't matter. Didn't matter if it was football, didn't matter if it was boxing, didn't matter if it was a weight room. Listen, you could pick any sport and it wouldn't matter. And I was willing to do one thing. I was willing to do whatever it took to be the best and to make it happen. Back in high school, I remember guys at the gym, the local gym, there were some guys there that were obviously bigger than other guys. And I was always fascinated once I started working out, probably around like 12, 13 years old. I was always fascinated with these guys that were bigger. Even back then in the movies, you had things like Rocky, you had Arnold Schwarzenegger back then. You had, Commando. You had all these movies, Jean-Claude Van Damme. All these guys with like these ripped bodies. But I became fascinated with them probably around like 11, 12 years old. Even football players. But as I started to be fascinated with them, I started to ask questions like, hey, how did this guy get this way? Or how did this football player get this way? And everyone started talking about things like steroids, supplements. Back then, supplements were just kind of starting to get popular. This was back around, the early 90s. But everyone today talks about this word called biohacking. And I really didn't know what that was. Obviously this hasn't become popular, biohacking, until now. But to me, biohacking is really about improving yourself, in your physical body, hacking your brain, just like hacking your biology to actually improve it. The problem is back then, and even now, supplements, yes, they do that, but taking steroids in an enormous amount or increasing amount when you don't really need it is not necessarily biohacking. Although it was about hacking, yourself as an athlete, hacking yourself as these things. But like I really started biohacking around 16 years old. I began using steroids. And part of the reason is I was willing to do whatever it took to give me an advantage. Back then it seemed like every college player, it seemed like every, if you wanted to be good in high school, it was kind of sold that, hey, you had to do this at some point. But I started using this around 16 years old, on and off until I was about 24. But some of the things that came out of it is this. Most guys start using this because they don't want to work hard. Like this is the average person today starts using this because they don't want to work hard. Maybe some other people use it today, for hormones and stuff like that because they're low. But I would say, the majority of guys in that age group, after about 20 is a lot of guys just don't want to work hard. I started using it and started doing double the work. Like I was already working my ass off. I just started working that much harder. I was already stronger than most of the guys. I wasn't weak. I was already one of the fastest guys. It just made me even more. But one of the things that it did is it taught me a lot about myself. You see, back then, I had anger problems. And not only did my strength increase, but my anger problems increased also. I didn't know how to deal with feelings, emotions. We didn't even know what the hell all these things were. But I would just put in all those feelings and emotions. I could put on a mask, a football helmet. I could put on headgear and begin to take out all these feelings and emotions on my opponents, athletes. At times, I would maybe get into a fight. And once I got into my 20s, I got into a lot of fights. Even in high school, off and on at parties, I would get into tons of fights because I didn't know how to deal with these feelings and emotions. And the only way that I did was through sports and through bodybuilding. And at times, if I didn't have that release, then I would need to do that. But this went on, like I trained nearly twice a day for almost a decade. I wanted to make myself more powerful than anyone because that was the identity that I was trapped under. And as long as I made myself more powerful than anyone, no one had the balls to question what I was doing or where I was at. You see, one of the most powerful things that you can feel as a man is to feel stronger and more powerful than anybody else. Is to be faster, bigger, all these things, because when you're that, no one's questioning. No one's questioning you at all. In fact, most people are intimidated to say anything to you. And what I would always find is most people would sit there and talk about what they did in the weight room. And then when we would show up, it was a completely different story. When you showed up, it was like talking about what you did in practice, and then come game time, most people don't show up, and you do. And you owned it. But this is the identity that I was trapped under. And even as I say this, getting into my 20s, when I began a personal training career and, just identifying myself still in my body, having to be a certain way, having to be a certain size, because in my mind, that was what it meant to be a man. That was what it meant to be powerful. You see, the gym was my identity. Nearly 20 years I'd spent in the training industry. And probably the last 4 owning my own training facilities, growing that into a multi-million-dollar business with my wife is, the thing that I found was I no longer wanted that identity. I no longer wanted to be that person. And I can remember kind of when I decided to stop using steroids, how much that messed with my head for nearly 2 to 3 years. And every once in a while I may come across, a bodybuilding show. Somebody might be getting ready for a show and it would kind of like trigger me and be like, man, I want to get back into that. And then I'd sit there and say, do you really want to go back to that version of yourself? And so as much as I wanted to break away from that, at the same time, it was easy to pull myself back into it. And so I fought with that for, probably the 8-9 years. And then as I grew, I'm like, hey, I want to be like this businessman. I want to work on business and grow my training business. And so I kind of eliminated that side of it, but I was still always known as the trainer, the one who got everybody into shape. And as I continued down this path, probably about 4 years ago, I realized, man, I'm kind of getting bored with this gym thing. And I would wrap myself into it, and I would start getting into marketing and getting into these other things and kind of get lost in that. And that went on for about the last 3-4 years. But, 3 years ago, I really started to feel trapped in my business. And I wanted to just get out of this identity that I'd kind of been trapped in, not only starting my business, but even prior to that, it was like everything that I'd built was around fitness. Everything that I was built was around looking a certain way. Everything that I had built was around people putting me into this category of just being a trainer. And I'll be honest with you, like I started to really not like it at all. I started to really not like myself. And so I began to have an opportunity to coach for Wake Up Warrior. And as I got into coaching, it kind of began to reshape a part of me. But it also began to break away this identity. And I want to kind of make you think of it this way. You see, inside of Wake Up Warrior, they would teach you, these 90-day challenges, these 12-week challenges. And I began to coin this term. Hey, this is a challenge-based lifestyle where every 90 days you would go through this 90-day challenge. And I started thinking about, man, if I just change this 1% every day, every quarter, I'm going to change around 9 to 10% every quarter. And so that meant for a whole year, I would change, if I changed every quarter, that 9%, or like 9.5%, if it's 1%, I would actually change about 36.5% over the course of a year. So basically, after 3 years of this, you've completely changed your entire identity and who you believe yourself to be. And it's important to talk about this 3-year mark because constant change for 3 years meant that I completely changed myself at a cellular level. My identity completely changed. And some people would only maybe go through the program for one 90-day challenge. Some people would go through for a year. Some people had been in for 5 years. And it seemed the people who had been in the longest had changed their complete identity and who they believe themselves to be. And this is kind of where I found myself. Even just this last year was like, hey, I didn't want to be this identity that everybody believed me to be inside of the community I was in. And so selling my business, selling my gym, moving to Southern California allowed me to completely change this identity and who I believe myself to be. And as much as I was pissed at them, as much as I was pissed at people in that circle, that's who they always believed me to be. And it got confusing and frustrating, not only for them, but for me. Because this identity that I had on my life had years of abuse, broken relationships, massive stress, anxiety. And then there was also the other side of it, which was massive success, family, happiness, joy, opportunities, marriage, 3 kids. I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. And so I want you to understand that as you think about or begin to reshape your identity, it's really a 3-year process, if not more. But I want you to also know this, that these days I don't worry too much about how I look. In fact, I probably carry more body fat than I have, but I'm grounded in who I am more than ever before. My training today is very different. It's to get leverage and power so I can be the best that I can be, the best husband, the best father, businessman, coach, leader that I can be. And anytime I get stressed, it's easy for me to want to run back and be like, oh, I need to, lose some more body fat. I need to get bigger, stronger, all these things. But it's just because that was safe. And you know what? I very rarely will ever talk, if ever, about what I used to lift, that I even played football and did boxing and did a lot of these things I did, because it's not who I am today. It's almost like a movie that I watched, 20 years ago. And you know what's funny? As much as I thought I was a badass then, I know that I would kick that guy's ass today, because my mind and my body are more aligned as weapons now than they ever have been. Here's the other thing. I watch all these people, on Instagram and showing, how much they lift, how much they do things. But here's the thing. Your fitness will only impress me when it matches your mindset and other areas of life. So your fitness will only impress me if it matches your other areas of life. So being one-dimensional, hey, that's great. Going out and doing these 50, 100-mile races, that's great. But how is that impacting your marriage? How is that impacting your business? How is that impacting you on a spiritual level? You see, one of the things that this has allowed me to do, and one of the greatest gifts that I have accessed, is what's inside of me, not what's on the outside. And the more I train on the outside, the more I am disconnected on the inside. Your gifts are on the inside of you, not the outside. And no matter how much you change, how you look on the outside, you still have to access these gifts on the inside. Changing your identity is simply about changing your habits. It's about accessing what you truly want on the inside, and the gifts that I have found have all come from that place. Nothing on the outside has been much of a gift. Sure, I've had great moments, great memories, and lots of things, medals and all that, and notoriety, but at the same time, I felt empty, where I feel much more fulfilled now knowing these gifts are all on the inside. But I want to ask you this one question. Where in your life is your identity keeping you stuck? Maybe it's an identity as, hey, here's how I've always been. Maybe it's as a mom. Maybe it's as a certain type of wife or husband. Maybe it's a dad. Maybe it's working for someone else instead of stepping out on your own. And how can you begin to shift out of this place and create a new version of yourself, understanding that it is going to take you probably 1 to 3 years to completely transform into that person? So I appreciate you guys being on here, sharing my story with you. If this has an impact on you, feel free to reach out to me, jesse@habitbasedlifestyle.com. If you're looking to connect further with a group of like-minded people, join myself and so many others in the Habit-Based Lifestyle Secrets group on Facebook. This is where I'll be dropping daily habits to help you live to your full potential. If you want to be one of our next case studies and begin living this habit-based lifestyle, check out the website, Jesse, JESSEEWELL.com, where you can find out how to get on a coaching call and let's have a conversation about how I can begin to help you and transform your identity and who you believe yourself to be. Thank you for being on here, and I will see you next episode. Have a great day.